I was trying to take care of him and our kids, and there's no sponsor help, there's no command spouse help, there was no spouse help, period. So that struggle kind of started of who's here to help me?
A young spouse fights to get her traumatized Air Force pilot husband the help he desperately needs. But once she's brought him and her family to safety, she finds herself struggling and alone.
You can still do the right thing and be afraid. Being afraid is just a feeling, and then you do it.
And what happens when a tough chaplain stands up against a commanding officer, sticking up for the warriors under her care? What makes her do that? Is it faith, or is it growing up a New Yorker? Hi, welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. Our lead story is a tale, sadly, too common in today's military. A warrior who gives everything, then finds himself not only traumatized, but abandoned by his colleagues and the leadership sworn to help him. The one who rose to fight on his behalf was his spouse, Margaret Compton. In her moving story, The Greatest Shitshow on Earth, Margaret details her own herculean effort to save her husband and family, and the inevitable cost to her. And in our second work, retired Navy and Marine chaplain Laura Bender describes what it's like to rise up in defense of the soldiers in her flock. She calls it a Gethsemane moment, where she's afraid, only until she leans on her faith and the knowledge that only doing the right thing was why she became a pastor in the first place. Let's listen to The Greatest Shitshow on Earth, performed by Laine Satterfield. Afterward, author Margaret Compton and I will talk.
Whether it's suffering in silence or battling the horrific joke of military mental health medicine, I never want anyone, especially a military spouse, to suffer the way I did. Feeling alone, being forgotten, becoming collateral damage was not what I expected to happen. It had been drilled into our minds that if we see something, say something. Every pamphlet and video screen advertised on base that the airman and his family were more important than the mission. We were told that all we had to do was ask for help. What happened to us was unacceptable. Actually, it was criminal. I've been told that this military lifestyle is a team sport. It is, when it's good. But when things turn bad, spouses are expected to accept what's happened, accept the circumstances, and carry on. Because we know what we signed up for. Sure, I knew some things as a fresh-off-the-boat 27-year-old wife of a captain, but nothing can prepare you for what this lifestyle is really like. Nothing. There wasn't a spouse class on base or a guidebook to reference when your spouse got PTSD. No PowerPoint to explain why I felt so damn crazy all the time, or why my moods would swing from blinding rage one minute to uncontrollable sobbing the next. No one from the POTTF group prepared me or gave me any direction for additional or higher-level help, even though I went to see them for months. When Mike and I went to the counseling center on base for marriage help, we specifically asked for help with dealing with PTSD in a marriage and the effects it could have, what expectations we should prepare ourselves for. We had 2 sessions until the lady actually looked at us and said, "I can't help you here. You need more than we're trained to give you." When we asked what to do next, she shrugged her shoulders and said she didn't know. I wish I was kidding. Just another one of the many shining moments for military mental health, ladies and gentlemen. We followed protocol. We asked for help at every office or group that was advertised by base. That we as a command and command spouse team would have sent our squadron people to for help. And now they're telling me this is it? We're shit out of luck? That we have to accept it and settle for uneducated and shitty support? When things happen like they did to us, I had to navigate blindly. I ran headfirst into a lot of concrete walls. I was fully exposed to all the symptoms, side effects, and trauma, being blown around like Dorothy in her tornado with no idea what the hell was happening. I had no storm cellar, no armor, nothing to protect myself from what was happening around me and to me. I had to build my own armor, which meant turning off my humanity switch, shutting down the emotional part of my brain, and focusing on two things: keep Mike alive and keep the kids safe. But as my armor got thicker, unknowingly, the deeper I went down into my own PTSD and depression hell, layer upon layer, silently building itself on a rocky foundation that was bound to crumble at some point. I figured once Mike got better and was on a safe path, I'd be fine. Life would go back to normal. Instead, that armor cracked and exploded. It was a train wreck of epic proportions, a total dumpster fire of hot mental mess that you could see from space. It was bad. You get the picture. As time went on and months went by, I got worse. Years of anxiety, adrenaline, grief, and suffocation continued to take their toll. I was close to breaking. So what did I do? I started drinking. Heavily. I also isolated myself and pushed everyone away. Everyone knows that's a recipe for disaster. I was desperately trying to numb the pain, guilt, shame, and grief. My PTSD triggers were hitting me every day, and I absolutely loathed who I was turning into. So much so that I couldn't even look in the mirror. When I did, the person looking back was ugly, damaged, the poster child of failure who should have done more to save her husband and family, someone who will never be enough. I saw someone who wasn't worthy, someone who was weak, pathetic even. I hid in that bottle for a long time. I hid from my kids. I hid from myself. There was nothing Mike could do because he understood the exact position I was in. Until I was ready, there wasn't anything anyone could do. I had a personal therapist, a marriage counselor, a psychiatrist, and a sponsor, but Mike still had to stand by and watch his wife slowly drinking herself to death. And what's worse is he knew he was my biggest trigger. Imagine how horrible that can be for a marriage. Even while battling the memories and nightmares, I was faced with a walking, talking, breathing reminder of what had happened every day. I was having terrifying flashbacks while walking in various rooms of our house, seeing things happen as vividly as they did that day, seeing his face in various stages of his addiction. One day, in a violent rage, I ripped the comforter off our bed because I hated the pattern and couldn't stop seeing Mike's unresponsive body or the look on my son's face as he begged me to call 911. Some days, even the smell of our house would throw me into a full-blown anxiety attack. When I looked at Mike, I seethed with hate and desperately loved him at the same time. Knowing I was doing this to my family made me feel even worse. My anxiety was so crippling, sometimes I wouldn't leave the guest room for days or even shower. I was slowly giving up on life. I didn't have anything left to give. And I felt that life would really continue on without me. I was the problem, and if I could leave or disappear, everyone would be happier and able to move on. I told myself that I ruined everything. No one needed me anymore. I was waiting to be thrown away like yesterday's trash. More than a year had gone by since this slow, painful, and gut-wrenching decline had started. At the end of November last year, I finally hit my rock bottom. I'd had a half-hearted suicide attempt. It was more of a massive cry for help, just trying to convey how deep the pain was and that the alcohol was no longer doing its job. I felt I had finally run out of options, and I was exhausted. One morning, extremely hungover and in excruciating pain, both physically and mentally, I felt something coming. I laid there, sweating profusely, my stomach rolling with wave after wave of nausea, and my head felt like it had an axe impaled in it. I was lying there, barely moving because I feared any movement would start a seizure. I knew from watching it firsthand that going cold turkey could result in one. I looked at the ceiling and started to pray to whoever was up there. It could have been God, Pocahontas, or the Easter Bunny for all I knew, but I was finally ready to do anything to never feel this way again. Please let me get through this day, and I swear I'll never drink again. I'm not done. I'll do anything, I swear. Just please don't take me from my kids. I repeated this chant in my head over and over throughout the day. I felt a strange calm start to come over me. It was moving at a snail's pace and was just as small, but it was there. When I finally felt like I could get up without passing out, I went to the living room and said to Mike, "I'm done." And in that exact moment, I knew I wanted to live. I knew I wanted to start fighting. I knew I wasn't done with this life. I knew I had so much to live for, but I had to start with myself. It was time for honesty. And from that day, I have been sober. My name is Margaret, and I'm an alcoholic.
That was Greatest Shitshow, read powerfully by Laine Satterfield. I'm joined in the studio by the author, Margaret Compton. Margaret, thanks for coming in. That story does all the work that needs to be done to detail your experience with the military. And I want to spend our time talking today about you and the you that represents military spouses. So you start off that story by saying it's a team sport when it works.
Yes.
And when it doesn't, well, it's a shit show. But what I don't think people understand is the role of the family.
Mhm.
And we hear so much about the PTSD of our warriors and not enough about the men and women and the children and the extended families and the friends and the colleagues who are there surrounding and trying to help and finding themselves thwarted because how much help can be done for somebody suffering like this. It has to start, as you said in the story, in that powerful ending when you said, walked in and you said to Mike, "I'm done."
Mhm.
But until you do that, this is not a team sport.
No.
So I want to start with you and we'll stay there for a while. This shitstorm hit your family. You stood up against it. You made sure Mike got the care he was supposed to get from the Air Force in response to his sacrifice and his service. And then it was your turn. But you ain't military.
No. I feel that I mean, that role also started, when Mike got sick because I was trying to take care of him and our kids, and there's no sponsor help, there's no command spouse help, there was no spouse help, period. So that struggle kind of started of who's here to help me?
You said in the story there's no spouse class on base.
No.
You're careening between rage and sobbing, but there's no preparation. It's got to be devastating to go from the romance because you're thinking it's very romantic. Oh, my husband's a hero. He's off doing tough stuff, right? And I'm here, the loyal, good spouse, right?
Mhm.
Taking care of the home and the fires and the family.
Yeah.
And then when it starts to go bad, there's no playbook.
No. And in the military, we always joke about everything has a PowerPoint because when you brief, you always have a PowerPoint, and there's no PowerPoint for this. And even when Mike and I were taking command, there was a command or I mean, it was a whole week of PowerPoints and presentations and how to deal with A, B, C, and D, everything from sexual assault to suicide to whatever. Not really much focused on the spouses. And it was romantic. I mean, there was an instance when we were in England and we used to have squadron lunches, and Mike happened to be flying a dayline, and we're in the lunchroom. It's got a window on the runway, and the Talon comes down and lands. The back of it opens up, and Mike walks out in his flight suit. I mean, you're hearing Top Gun, you're seeing Tom Cruise. It's like
Mm.
the hottest thing you've ever seen. That was all gone. It's not romantic anymore. It's not dreamy. It's not a happy time. And just like smoke, it just goes up. I had nothing. So helping Mike through what he was going through while begging all the various levels for help. Once he finally did get the help, where'd that leave me? I was alone. Mike's on a med board. He's trying to take care of our kids while I'm completely falling apart. And during his struggle, all the spouses that I had been working with on that command level and higher just slowly drifted away.
Use the phrase in the story PTSD in a marriage,
Mhm.
which I think is really indicative because you didn't talk about Mike's PTSD. You didn't talk about your own per se. You couched it at all times like it's the team sport they say it's going to be.
Mhm.
But it turns out that PTSD, when it strikes, is also a team sport.
Yes.
You shared his, but here's the thing that I found most tragic, Margaret, is that Mike wasn't able to play the role for you that you were able to play for him.
When Mike finally did get into a good safe space and I realized that his sobriety was gonna stick this time, and he had his support in place, he had a good sponsor, he had his therapist, he was going through all the things, checking all the boxes. But for me, he didn't he didn't know what to do, and he very much, compartmentalizes things, and he was just solely focused on the kids. And he also knew, though, that until I was ready to say, like, "I'm done," there's nothing he could do. Especially on base. Who does he go to help his wife? When we have been let down so many times, and at that point in our struggle, he didn't trust anybody. Friends, leadership. I mean, people had leaked his medical records to senior leadership. He tried to open up to a few friends, and it was the, "Oh, it can't be that bad," or "Why don't you just get over it," or this, that, and the other. So he didn't trust anybody. So he had no one to ask for help either for me. So the only thing he could do, what I did, was take care of his sobriety and keep the kids safe, and he had to let me fall down that rabbit hole. I talk about having a rock bottom. My rock bottom had trapdoors. Every time I got sober, I was like, "Okay, finally, this is it. I'm ready." Nope, something else would happen.
And you describe it as anxiety leading to grief, leading to isolation, leading to self medication with alcohol. I like the way you describe it as trapdoors because each one of those, when you conquer one, you get over one. Well, there's another one waiting for you.
Mhm.
I have heard from another one of our writers, Laura Bender, a
Mm,
chaplain,
love her.
refers to her career. She says, at the end, I was broken,
Mhm.
but I was glad because it told me I had given everything.
I love that. Yeah,
And that feels applicable here,
right.
does it?
In certain ways, it does. When I finally, I checked all my boxes. I had the right psychiatrist. I didn't know how bad my anxiety was and how much that was contributing to the drinking. And once I got my anxiety under control, kind of everything kind of started to flow. But I felt very bent. 'Cause I wasn't gonna let them break me. They didn't break me during Mike, they weren't gonna break me now. And I was grieving the life that I had prepared for. When Mike and I met, before we even got married, he said, "This is my path." He had it planned out until 2025. He said, "You're on board, that's great. If you're not, I get it. Here's your out." And I've been preparing all those years to be a command spouse. My greatest power is to take care of other people. And so when he took command and then was relieved of command 9 months later, I had to grieve that life that was ripped away from me. My purpose in this military was ripped away from me. And at the end of this, I don't feel that I was able to give everything because the opportunity was taken away from me. I also feel that I wasn't able to give everything. And I know Mike feels the same way because of the way we were treated. We weren't treated as, injured airmen and family. We were treated as, cog in the machine broke. He's got to go. And what they're viewing as our weakness ended up being our greatest strength. And so I don't feel that I got to give everything. And I also do grieve that I had so much more to give, which is now why I'm doing what I'm doing.
I'm aware of some of the details, but briefly, so the audience can understand how profound Mike's PTSD was.
Mhm.
This wasn't nightmares and it wasn't drinking. It wasn't querulousness. It was all the above. It was the entire banquet of PTSD presentations.
Right.
Give the audience a sense of how profound Mike's PTSD was.
Obviously never having dealt with this, never having a discussion about this. After he came home from his deployment, the day he got off the plane, I knew something was wrong. And we didn't know that it could take 6 months for the real PTSD symptoms to start showing up. So when he went back to work and seemed fine, I was like, whew, dodged a bullet. But he still seemed off. Throughout his struggle, he obviously was drinking a lot. I mean, in the Air Force, they are okay if you drink to feel better or after a long flight, but when it becomes a problem, then it's a problem. He started small and then he went big. We did everything from seizures from going cold turkey. They were over-medicating him. They were giving him Ambien while he was drinking, so that resulted in 2 falls, staples, 2 TBIs that are now in his medical records from falling. We had 2 911 calls when he was unresponsive. Several times I had to take him to the emergency room because I knew his blood alcohol was too high. And then the day we went and found him in the hotel room probably was the weirdest and calmest day of my life as I'm looking at a colonel telling her, "Are you prepared for what's behind the doors?" I've never felt so calm in my life thinking that when we open that door, he's gonna be dead because I've been waiting for this moment for years. And he did everything. Was he suicidal intentionally? No. If it happened, it was gonna happen, and he wasn't gonna do anything to stop it. So he went the full gambit of weight loss, nausea, balance. I mean, he had just enough to give to go to work, and when he came home, we never saw him because he was asleep or drinking, and
You refer to yourself, Margaret, as having the superpower of caring for other people. So tell us about the kids.
the first round that we went through, the kids were pretty young. They didn't really understand a lot. It was hard having to take them to a rehab center and explain that Santa dropped the gifts off. Explaining to a 3-year-old that daddy broke his brain, that he can't put a Band-Aid on it, that he has to go to see special doctors, and they were okay with that because they were young. But man, the second time around was completely different. There were times when my middle son, who had been most attached to Mike, was afraid of him. They all eventually became afraid of him because he was a shell of himself. I mean, daddy was there, but no one was home upstairs. And even now, my kids, I can see they suffer with anxiety. They've confided in teachers that they're afraid that if they go home, one of us isn't going to be there. They're very emotionally attached to me. During my struggle, and I think just because of the emotional mother I am, when I would struggle, they would, crawl into bed with me and say, Mommy, I'm sorry that you feel so sad, and they would snuggle. But when Mike went through his stuff, they wouldn't go near him. So it was 2 very different dynamics. And today, they are 3 of the most empathetic, most kind children you will ever meet. They have learned so much. I've been very open, especially with our older 2, about alcohol and what it does, how some people can drink and some people can't. The middle son, anytime he sees it, like, on TV, he's very much like, he's drunk, he's an alcoholic, so he's just very quick to assume that that's what it does to people. But, even in school, I'm proud of them, but this year, all 3 of them got the Empathetic Kindness Award in their classes
Mm.
for looking out for other children. My oldest has come home worried about a schoolmate and things at home, so in a way, my children are some of the most resilient children you ever meet. They're also some of the kindest and most empathetic, and they can just read people because they have been through the worst. And I've heard my young 7-year-old or 10-year-old say, "I don't want my friends to ever be sad."
Every great story, which this is, has a great ending.
Mm.
So from the moment when you said, I'm done, I'm not drinking anymore, I want to live, what lies ahead for Margaret and her family?
That that was a day, and I always tell people, when you go to AA, everyone talks about the burning bush moment when you feel the obsession lifted, and I thought it was a bunch of crap. But that day it was, because up until that moment, drinking was a full-time job, and I didn't wanna do it, I was exhausted, but I had to. That obsession lifted, and from that moment on, just looking at my kids, seeing them in college, seeing them get married, seeing them do all those things, seeing why am I going through all this to end it, and that's in that moment I wanted to live, and I didn't know what the future looked like. I mean, that's part of my anxiety that I had to get over, but I just saw my children and saw their faces and kinda said the same thing. In the military, they didn't ask for this, and as their mother, it's my job to protect them and to give them the best future that I can, and that starts with me, and I can only focus on me, and that's what they say, and so it was just one day at a time. In those first 30 days, it was white knuckling, but those kids were, they talk about a higher power. In those 30 days, those kids were my higher power, and it just you get down kind of how I did with Mike, you have to buckle down. You don't have any of the options. I have to stay alive. I have to take care of those children. And that was the only thing I focused on.
Let's finish up with a piece of advice for future military spouses. Margaret Compton says,
If you see something, say something. And just because you're a spouse, it doesn't mean that you're less than. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve an audience with a colonel. I had audiences of 3 different colonels because they needed to hear me. And I deserved to have that. And you deserve to be heard. And no request is too small. No concern is too small. We are on the battlefield. We are on the front line, and we are collateral damage, and that has to stop. The only person that's going to advocate for you is yourself.
I am giving Margaret Compton a fist bump, folks. Boom.
Boom.
Margaret, much respect, girl.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This has been amazing.
Thank you. Now our second piece, Calling Home, by Laura Bender. Again, read by Laine Satterfield. Afterward, Chaps and I will chat.
The fine Kuwaiti sand blew around us, settling like a coat of talc on everything. I removed my goggles and tried to wipe the lenses, but my sleeve only added more dust. Parting the flap on the headquarters tent, Chaplain Ron and I entered, then quickly secured it behind us. A few of the admin types looked up to see who was arriving, but finding it was only chaplains, they buried their heads in their work. The CO's office is in the back. Ron headed toward the rear of the tent, passing a large dusty table with 2 printers covered in saran wrap like everything else electronic. New to the command, I followed closely. He knocked on the tent pole in the area that housed the CO's desk and cot. "Sir, this is Chaplain Ron. Permission to enter." Commander H invited us in, but not to sit. He stayed behind his desk. "Sir, this is Chaplain Bender with Bravo Surgical Company. Welcome. You are the last chaplain to arrive. 2 reservists, one an LT and the other, Lieutenant Commander, got here a few days ago. They are in the neighboring camp. Have you met them yet?" "No, sir. Only Chaplain Ron." "How long have you been in the Navy, LT?" 4 years, sir." You're probably not going to like what I'm going to say. Chaplain Ron has only been in the Navy for 18 months, but he's my chaplain. Even though he's the most junior of the 4 of you, I'm placing him in charge of you. You may still see me directly as chaplains do, but he is in charge. How does that sit with you, Chaplain Bender?" "Commander H, we are here to take care of sailors and Marines. As long as we do that, I don't care who has the administrative lead." "Very well, chaplains. That is all." Ron walked out smirking. "I'm in charge." "Good luck with that. More naps for me." After meeting with the CO, Ron took me for a walk around the base. His surgical company lived in tents on the north side and mine on the south of a flat expanse of desert enclosed by a sand berm. The headquarters tent and the motor pool were in the middle. Each side had a shower trailer, a water buffalo with non-potable water, and a row of porta potties. The chow tent sat in the middle of the north side. Guess I can count the hike from my area to the chow tent as PT. "You'd better be doing real PT while you're here. It's still a requirement." Ron looked serious. I ignored him. We walked near a large Bedouin tent on the north side. "This is where I live. There are 25 other guys who live here, too." Same arrangement for me. I lived with 25 women, mostly nurses. Not too much further, we came to a smaller tent. "This is Charlie Company's chapel, where I counsel people and lead Bible study. We hold services in our training tent because it's bigger. You and I will alternate leading those." "And Bravo Company has a chapel tent on the south side? I haven't seen it yet." "You did. But one of our 06 nurses said she is too senior to share quarters with anyone, so she claimed it as her private residence." "And you allowed that?" "She's a colonel. I can't tell her what to do." "Yes, you can, Ron. You are responsible for that space. It's not assigned to her." Ron's face flushed. "I'll let you use my chapel tent. Just clear it with me each time." Later that day, I visited with the Bravo Company CO to inform him that a senior nurse had turned space assigned to the command religious program into a residence. Another LT, he said I should say nothing and lead my study groups and counseling sessions outdoors. My next stop was Commander H. "Sir, one of your nurses has taken Bravo's chapel tent as a residence. That space is assigned to us." "So use Charlie's tent or a training tent when it's empty." I stared at him. "Is there something else, Chaplain?" "Yes, sir. I've noticed that everyone in Charlie Company sleeps on a cot. Bravo is still sleeping on the floor. When I asked about our cots, I was told we did not have permission to unload them. Our medical staff is not that young. We need cots too." "Back hurting you, Chaplain?" I stared at him. The cots will stay right where they are. The next Sunday after the church service, while chatting with one of our senior surgeons, I mentioned that several of our medical personnel had expressed concerns to me about sleeping on the floor where scorpions and spiders often walked. That evening, we got cots. One day, Ron came to me with a complaint. Your unit is disturbing our unit in the morning. Tell them to be more considerate. What do you mean? They bother your folks at Chow? They drink all the coffee? No, before that. Your unit musters at 0545. Ours is not required to muster until 0800. Since the Chow Hall doesn't serve until 0700, your folks are stomping around and making noise while they wait. We can't sleep. Commander H decided the muster times. Take it up with him. The next day, H changed Bravo's muster to 0615 so we could form up, get the word for the day, and go directly to Chow. He also changed Charlie's muster to 0815. Hey, Ron, are you hearing concerns from your people about not being able to contact their families? My folks are getting antsy because they never got to tell their loved ones they arrived safely. No, I'm not hearing any of that since we all got a 5-minute call on the CEO's satellite phone the night we arrived. Really? Let's go visit the CEO. I want to ask him about calls for our unit. He isn't in right now. He went to a meeting at another base. When I stopped by to deliver his chocolates, that's what his staff told me. Chocolates? What are you talking about? To keep up his morale, I leave chocolates on his pillow every day. I stuck my fingers in my ears. Please don't say that again. That's a picture I don't want in my head. Later that day, I went to see Commander H without him. I'm sorry, Chaplain, but I will not authorize the use of my phone for your unit. We are your unit too, sir. We are augmented to you for this mission, and you will be better able to focus on that mission if you are not distracted with news from home. But, sir, we are very distracted by the lack of it. Your sailors and Marines are literate, aren't they? They know how to hold a pen, right? Tell them to write a letter. Yes, sir. I believe our surgeons and medical staff are literate. I'll give them the message. We all wrote letters. A week later, the not ready for operation yet postal system returned every letter to us. Ron, next time you deliver chocolates, please tell the CEO that the letters he told us to write have all been returned. We are now getting inbound Red Cross messages from frantic families who have not heard from their service member in almost a month. Chaplain Bender, I don't like your tone. I think it's time to rein you in. Starting tomorrow, I want you to muster with me every morning so I can review what you plan to do that day. Really, Ron? You want me to get your permission to do my job every morning? So where would you suggest we meet? Since Charlie Company's muster is at 0815, you will muster at my cot at 0745. Your cot? In your tent? You are out of your mind. That's what I said, and that's what you'll do. As I stomped away, the image of mustering next to Ron's cot danced in my brain. The more I visualized it, the more I liked the idea. The next morning at 0745 exactly, I pushed open the flap on Ron's tent. Thankfully, his cot was near the entrance. I walked over smartly, stood at attention, and announced, Chaplain Bender, reporting as ordered. Around me, 25 men in various states of dress whipped their heads in my direction. Chaplain Bender, what are you doing in here? Before I could answer, Ron did. I told her to muster with me here every day. I'm in charge of her, you know. At the request of one of the senior officers, I left the tent. From outside, I could hear a lot of unpleasant yelling. Soon Ron appeared, carrying his sea bag and bedding. You can't use my chapel tent anymore. I've decided I deserve a private place to live. 2 days later, the senior chaplain for all Marine units called a meeting. The guest speaker was Colonel M., the chief of staff. I rode to the meeting in an ambulance with Ron and our assistants. The other 2 chaplains Ron supervised were also in attendance. We sat together toward the back of the tent. Colonel M. began his talk with generalities about the pending war, what we should expect and what he expected from us. When he finished, he looked around the room and began asking for input. He wanted to know how things were going in our units. Seeing me, the only female chaplain, he asked, "Chaplain Bender, how are my female Marines?" I stood to address him. "Sir, I don't work with your female Marines." "Then where do you work?" "I am with the Health Services Battalion, sir, specifically Bravo Surgical Company." "So, Chaplain Bender, how is my medical unit?" A surge of heat rose from my heart to my head. I took a deep breath. If I couldn't speak up for the people I serve, why the hell was I here? "Sir, medical is not doing well." Every chaplain's head turned towards me. Most were glaring. How many times at chaplain school did they warn us never to speak negatively about our leadership? Why are they not doing well? "Sir, Bravo's surgical company has been at Camp Guadalcanal for 5 weeks without being able to contact our families to let them know we arrived safely. I addressed it with the CO, and he instructed us to write letters, but those were returned by the postal system. This is becoming a distraction for our personnel. For a week now, we have been receiving inbound Red Cross inquiries from frantic loved ones. If we could make a morale call, sir, that would help us be ready to cross over into Iraq." "Most camps have email. You don't have it in yours?" "Not for our use, sir." "Is this a concern for the entire unit?" "No, sir. Alpha Company made phone calls home the day they arrived." Colonel M paused, then nodded his head. "Commander H is your CO, right?" "Yes, sir." "That explains the problem. He likes to create his own kingdom with himself as the dictator. Thank you, Chaplain. After this meeting, I will send 2 satellite phones to Bravo Company. They will remain there until everyone in your unit has had a 5-minute call home." "Thank you, sir." Weak in the knees, I sat. What did I just do? Commit career suicide? The other chaplains around me were shaking their heads like they had witnessed my justified demise. Oh, hell. What could the Navy do to me? Send me to Iraq? If I survived, I'd likely be glad to get out of the military anyway. "Attention on deck!" My inner monologue ended abruptly as I snapped to attention for Colonel M's departure down the center aisle. When he arrived at the row where I was seated, he stopped, reached out his hand, and shook mine. "Thank you for your honesty, Chaplain Bender." Ron was on me the minute the Chief of Staff stepped out of earshot. "How dare you throw our CO under the bus?" "I didn't throw him under the bus, Ron. He threw himself by not taking care of his troops. I told the truth. If that puts him in a terrible light, he should have acted better. I'm going to tell him what you did when we get back to the base." Chaplain M, a lieutenant commander Catholic priest, who LT Ron also supervised, scowled at him. "I'm sure you will, Ron." "I don't like your tone. I'm in charge of you too. By the way, I know something about your unit that you don't know." "What is that?" "I'm not going to tell you." Chaplain M put his nose close to Ron's. "Quit the fucking games. It's poor leadership." Ron jumped to his feet. "We're leaving." I gathered my things, gave a thumbs up to the priest, and headed out of the tent. Once in the ambulance for the ride back to camp, Ron came unglued. RP3 Howell, my assistant and bodyguard, edged closer to me on the seat. As Ron ranted on about my disloyal behavior, I signaled RP3 to keep quiet. I did not want him involved in the mess I had chosen. He had a family to support. "Stop the vehicle. I don't want to be around you anymore." At Ron's order, his assistant hit the brakes. "Get out, Laura. You can find your own way back to camp." When I exited the ambulance, I could see we were only a half-mile across the sand from the camp's entry point. Even though the command had warned us never to walk out in the desert because of random attacks by disgruntled Kuwaitis, I was glad to be away from Ron. As the ambulance sped away, RP3 stood behind me. "I'm your bodyguard, ma'am. Besides, if I had stayed, I would have knocked him on his ass." "He's pretty much all ass, isn't he?" "Yeah, and he should get in trouble for leaving us out here, but I bet he won't." In the distance, his vehicle drove through the gate. "Come on, RP3. Let's see if we can make it to Chow before it closes." After lunch, I stopped in to see the Bravo Company CEO to report my comments at the meeting and let him know to expect the satellite phones. I did not see Ron again until dinner, when he blew into the chow hall in a huff. I was eating with the psychologist from his company when he arrived. I need to see you in private, right now. I excused myself from the table and followed him outside the tent. I've spent much of the afternoon relating to Commander H the events of today's meeting. Did you remember to bring his chocolates? Don't get smart with me. You are in big trouble. He has ordered me to get statements from you and both our assistants. I already told him what you said, but he needs a statement about what Colonel M said about him in front of that room full of people. I've already gotten statements from our assistants. And what did they say? They both said the meeting was boring and they had stopped paying attention after the first 5 minutes, but I know you heard what he said. Ron had paper and pen in hand, ready to write. Chaplain Ron, I am much older than you. As you know, one problem that comes with aging is cognitive decline. I would like to help you, but I have no memory of what that colonel, what's his name, said about Commander H. You should get dinner. The chow hall is closing soon. He stormed away without eating. That night the phones arrived, and every member of Bravo Company signed for a time slot. I waited for my official reaming, but it didn't occur. Instead, over the next 2 days, I received tearful hugs, whispered thanks, and even an ovation at dinner. The comments overwhelmed me. My wife thought I didn't love her anymore because she never heard from me. I got to hear my children's voices. You made it possible for me to tell my family I love them. If I get killed in Iraq, at least I got to talk with my family one last time. RP3 gave me a big hug. My wife says we're having a girl. A few days later, I got a visit from the senior chaplain. I bet you are wondering why Commander H has not taken you to task for the phone issue. Yes, sir, but I am ready for whatever he wants to do to me. Hearing the responses from my sailors and Marines makes the consequences worth it. Don't worry about the consequences. There won't be any. Colonel M heard that Commander H wanted to know what he had said about him at the meeting, so he paid him a visit and told him face to face. He also told him he had better be in good humor about what you did because it was the right thing to do. You also need to know that after Colonel M visited with Commander H, he ordered every unit in Tactical Area Coyote, that's all the camps getting ready to cross into Iraq, to give their people a morale call before they leave. I just thought you should know. Nice work. Stay safe out there. After the senior chaplain left, I took a stroll around the perimeter to mull over all that had transpired. I knew I was going to need all the strength God would provide for whatever else lay ahead.
I'm joined by former Marine and Navy chaplain Laura Bender from her home in Michigan, complete with her parakeets in the background. Laura, thank you for joining us again. Now, that story, calling home, that was about two things: speaking truth to power and holy shit, I just spoke truth to power. I want to know, look, you were in a room full of people who said nothing. The surgeons said nothing. The other chaplain said nothing. No one said nothing. And then there's Laura Bender. And you stepped up at no small risk to your career, right? You loved your career. I want to know, how much of the person that spoke up was road rage New Yorker Laura? And how much of that was, well, just chaplain, faith in God, it'll all turn out, Laura? Make me a pie chart.
Okay. So I've always believed that I work for God. I've had times in my life where I've gotten to see just the results of my not paying attention to God and doing things on my own. Not so good. So that experience taught me to say, okay, God, here I am. Do with me what you will. And I truly do that. I felt in that moment that if I could not advocate for the people who needed my assistance, the people I was there to serve, that there was no reason for me to be there.
Give me an example.
Just dumb stuff. I can remember once when I was in seminary, I was so tired of thinking I had to do God's will that during a chapel service, I got up, walked out in the aisle, shook my fist at the altar, and turned around and walked out. And the whole time I was walking, in my mind, I could feel God behind me laughing Go ahead, have a tantrum.
See how this works out. See how this works out for you.
Yeah, right. See how this works out. You'll be back.
Good luck with that, right?
Uh-huh.
That's a lovely story. Now, okay, to be fair, yes, you were committed to doing the right thing. And yes, you did show great personal courage and great faith in the safety net of your Lord. But you admitted in the story that your knees were shaking. You admitted in the story that everybody looked at you, the chaplains, everybody looked at you and said, well, we just saw the burnout of the career of Chaplain Laura Bender. So even in that moment, that chalice cup, right, take this from me, in that moment, you still had doubts, right? It wasn't just a slam dunk like, oh, speak up to this son bitch. It's not as easy a call as maybe you might make it seem.
So you can still do the right thing and be afraid. Being afraid is just a feeling, and then you do it. Everybody has a Gethsemane moment. Take this cup from me. Okay, not my will, but yours. All right. So you do it.
And I guess it's that fear that makes the act that much braver, that much more memorable, and even epic is the fear. If you don't feel fear, then anybody would do it, right?
And I'm not sure that everybody else would be as committed to taking care of people. I've known many who just didn't make it a priority in their careers to reach out to sailors and Marines who needed them, spent a lot of time in their office, spent a lot of time polishing the turd of their fitness report so that they could, get ahead, because there isn't always a personal career-wise payoff for taking the needs of people, especially junior to you, into consideration. And I think I was fortunate because coming out of a church where they're often angry with you just because you're female and you show up to do your job, I was pretty much used to people not rewarding me or being kind to me for doing the right thing. So it was kind of like business as usual. I might as well do the right thing. Years ago, I had heard a United Methodist chaplain, Bob Phillips, give a talk about his initial career. He said when he first entered the chaplain corps, there was a senior chaplain who said, I don't like you and I'm going to scuttle your career, probably because Bob was highly competent. But anyway, he said, okay, well, in that case, that frees me up to do the right thing every single day. It's good to be dead. If I'm dead, then I just get to do the right thing. And I took that kind of as a mantra for my career that, I might as well just do the right thing. And whatever happens, happens. Okay.
Did that stay behind? That I'm dead, so I'm playing with house money here. Did that stay behind when you left the military, or do you still have that?
Oh, no, I still have that. No, I wake up every day and say, I still work for God, but I've gotten rid of the annoying middleman. So I'm a caseworker with Salvation Army, and I work on a Veterans Council for mental health issues. I do these things because they're the right things to do. Sometimes people will say, oh, doesn't it make you so, feel good about yourself working with these people that have issues? No, I don't get joy out of it, but it would be wrong for me to live in my community and have the skill set I have and not use it for good.
And you said in the story, screw it, what are they going to do? Send me to Iraq?
Yeah, that's right. Like, hit me with your best shot. You just go right ahead and see where that gets you. So this incident about the phone calls, when I was working at the chaplain school, there was someone who was putting together training in ethics, and they were looking for stories. So I wrote up the bare bones of what happened and gave it to them, and they included it in some training. And then about 10 years later, I got a phone call from someone who was asking my permission if I would allow that story to be used at Officer Training Command in Newport to train staff officers, and that's lawyers, doctors, nurses, chaplains, etc. And he called me back about a year later, and he said, you probably should know that the result of this is that most of the chaplains said, you didn't do the right thing. And most of the rest of the staff officers said, you did.
Now, How does somebody like Chaplain Ron or Commander H, with those skill sets, being so, at least as they were portrayed in your story, Laura, being so solipsistic and so self-interested, how do they rise to these positions of authority?
Well, Ron was putting chocolates on his clothes, on Captain H's pillow, which
Yeah, you've infected my head with that image too, so thank you.
I know. I couldn't believe he was doing that, but he was.
Did he wear an apron, a little apron? Maybe a mob cap?
Well, there are people who spend a lot of time doing what it takes to push their own career forward. They know the right people to talk to. They don't do the controversial thing. They make sure that they check all the right boxes because they know about a career progression. And I just was not that kind of person. I was there because I really loved the sailors and the Marines, and I really wanted to take care of them. I had worked in youth ministry for many years, and I just really liked taking care of young people. I never had any of my own children, and I knew that these people, many of them, needed essentially the extra parent. Many came from homes where good parenting was lacking, and I really felt called to be the extra parent. That had nothing to do with career progression, and I loved it. One of the things that I found in war is that when people are afraid, they revert back to what gives them comfort. Comfort is basically what's familiar. So if someone, for example, grew up in a very abusive household, although that's awful, it's also familiar. And so people can revert to being cruel or abusive to other people in the unit because somehow it makes them feel a level of comfort that comes from living with the familiar.
And the opposite must be true as well.
Yes. If people come from a background where people are kind and thoughtful and caring, they'll revert to that. But it's difficult, because people are not necessarily their best selves in war. And you are fighting alongside them. And you have to still be comrades in arms.
If we have in our audience a future chaplain, somebody considering going into the military chaplaincy, and they've listened to that story, and they're hesitating, talk them back into it. Tell them why it's such a great thing to do.
The reason you want to be a chaplain is because people will need someone who can care for them and hear them when they say things that they don't want to tell anyone else. They need someone who can keep their secrets. They need someone who can connect them to their faith, whatever their faith tradition is, because from that tradition, they gain great strength. In every sector of the world, civilian or military, there are people who are very difficult to work with or work for, but that doesn't mean you don't show up and do the right thing. And if you have a love for sailors and Marines and for helping young people find their best selves and figure out how to have a good life, then you want to join the Chaplain Corps and work with those young people. It really will make a difference.
And no matter who you work for, in the end, the boss is God, right?
Absolutely. You got to watch out because God has a great sense of humor.
And sometimes doesn't. Laura Bender, always a joy, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for joining the Mighty Pen podcast and for being a part of my life and an inspiration to me. Thank you.
Blessings to you, David.
The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America and you want to learn how to best tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's pieces and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen podcast. It's an honor.